Well, good evening. This is another Pelagic Workshop. This one is on docking and the basics of docking. And thank you very much for Craig for helping with this presentation. Craig's helped me review it and done some editing on it. And this, just to give a little bit of background, this comes from the fact that I was sort of thrown into docking in the deep end when I bought my first boat, Zanzibar, which some of you are familiar with. I bought it at a tiny little marina called Pirate Cove, had a tiny slip, and had to learn how to get in and out of that slip straight out of the sort of first to go. And found it quite intimidated, made a lot of screw ups. And from it, did a lot of research. And I like to think got some tips and tricks that might help you guys. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Go to full view. There we go. And I want to make sure I'm sharing. So Craig, can you just confirm if you're seeing my screen?
No, you're not sharing yet.
Okay. Go back then. Screen. Okay, let's try again. There we go.
There we are.
Okay, I'm showing the screen now.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Off we go. This is a picture of Pirate Cove Marina, and you'll see another picture of this in a very short video towards the end, but you can see how tight that is. So I've got an agenda here. I'm not going to read every line to you specifically, but when I send this out, people are welcome to read through it. The scope of this workshop. So there's only time to do specific stuff here. So we're going to talk about specifically docking a single engine sailboat. In this, all the examples are going to be for boats that have a right hand, that is, the propeller rotates clockwise when viewed from the rear and in forward. And it does not have a bow thruster, which in my view is cheating. We don't include boats with bow thrusters or two engines, such as a catamaran. Those are a different discussion, and in general, a lot easier. But for those of you who have been on catamarans with two engines, it's great fun. You can steer them like a tank. And we're also not covering docking lines or spring lines in tricky situations. There just isn't enough time with the amount of material to cover here, and hopefully a good discussion afterwards. So we can do another workshop if there's enough interest on those topics. I've learned a lot from this book called Boat Docking. I don't believe it's in print anymore. I was able to get a copy on Amazon many, many years ago. It is a phenomenal book. It covers all aspects of docking and indeed taught me a lot of the stuff you're going to see here. And he does go into depth in covering all of the different techniques for getting in and out of really tricky docking situations with spring lines and all the other tricks that you might have. So I do recommend that reference. So let's review the overview of the factors that impact docking. And this is a really critical part in my mind for the crew and the skipper to really internalize what factors they have, what they can control, what they can't control, and other factors. So I've listed the ones I'm aware of here. Your plan, I put that first. It was at the end, but I think your plan of how you're going to dock is really important. You need to know the dock you're going into, preferably. If you don't, then your plan is going to have to accommodate the fact you don't know your dock. But you do need to get some basic information about the dock you're going into, hopefully over the radio, and we'll talk about that later. You do control the engine power and propeller thrust, and whether you're in forward or reverse, and you control the rudder angle. Those are your basic controls you have. Factors that you cannot control are prop walk, the current in the water, any wind, and any other traffic that suddenly surprises you. I was just in the middle of doing a tricky docky situation, getting ready to turn into my slip, and one of those big monster powerboats decided to come up, didn't want to give way, it literally just pushed me out the way. I had to reverse in a most inconvenient way out of the channel just because this moron wasn't prepared to give way. And then the other factors you have are space constraints. Places like Pirate Cove Marina are so tight that it makes docking even trickier than would normally be. If you have a lot of space, you have a lot more flexibility. And then the experience of the skipper, of course, is a big factor. And I would say there that you have to make sure you're not overconfident or underconfident. You're never going to learn to dock if you don't try it, but also you'll make a real mess of it if you are overconfident that it's a breeze and not a problem. Let's talk about prop walk, which is one of the big factors that cause people to be nervous about docking. The prop walk is the tendency for the propeller on a boat to apply a force perpendicular to the direction of travel. Apologies for the mouthful. So on most boats with a right-hand propeller, prop walk is going to go to starboard going forward. All examples in this workshop are based on a right-hand propeller. And it'll be to port if you're going in reverse. And we'll talk about how much of that in a minute. Several factors contribute to prop walk: the angle of the propeller, the proximity of the keel. And prop walk is one of the major factors that make skippers nervous about docking. If you understand the prop walk on your boat, you can use it to your advantage. So it's really important to understand prop walk characteristics for your boat or the boat you're on. Propeller thrust and rudder. So each boat has different characteristics that impact propeller and rudder. Get to know these features on your boat. I would encourage you to understand your hull shape, full keel versus fin keel, how close the propeller is to the rudder, size of the rudder, and skeg, and so on. All those factors will affect how much prop walk you determine your boat has. If you're going in forward, and here's a suggestion that I have for what you test to find out your prop walk, go to a dead stop and then start. If the rudder is turned full to starboard, okay, and you start the engine, the bow will swing to starboard with hardly any forward motion. If there is starboard prop walk, you won't notice it. And I emphasize that even if you're pointing forward, you won't notice it, because the prop wash is going over your rudder, and any tendency for prop walk to starboard and forward, you just won't sense because the rudder overwhelms it. The key point here that I want to emphasize is this technique here is something we're going to use in just a minute for rotating a boat. So I'm just going to repeat again so I don't miss the significance of this. I'm saying you're at a dead stop. You've turned the rudder to full starboard or port, but starboard is going to be for this example. And you go into forward, and just the bow of the boat will swing to starboard. The stern will rotate a little, but you'll hardly make any forward motion, at least for the first few seconds. So the beginnings of a turn, beginnings of rotation. Okay? If you go into reverse, again, from a stop, with the rudder in any position, because remember the propeller is putting its prop wash now over the keel of the boat, not over the rudder. There's water being sucked in around the rudder, but not over the rudder. So the stern will tend to swing to port, again, on a right-hand propeller boat, which mine is. Or another way of thinking of that, if it's clearer for you, the boat will tend to rotate clockwise. Again, it won't tend to move forward or backwards yet. It's just the stern will tend to kick around, and you'll see this a little bit later on. The key point here, we're going in reverse. The rudder will be ineffective until you have enough reverse speed that you've got water developing, water moving over the rudder just because of the velocity you're moving at. So let me sort of highlight that, because that's a critical part. When you're going in forward, even if you're not moving, the propeller pushes water over the rudder. And so when you turn the rudder, the boat responds immediately. In reverse, the propeller is pushing water over the keel, so there is no water going over the rudder at a stop. The rudder is useless. When you start moving in reverse, which will happen over the next 5, 10, 20 seconds, then water starts going over the rudder, and it will start to take effect. But the key point there is, since you're trying to get moving in reverse, you want to have the rudder straight. If you've got the rudder already turned because you think you want to force it around that corner, all you're doing is putting up a big 4-foot or 6-foot barrier to going in reverse. You're slowing yourself down from doing what you're trying to do, which is going to reverse. So you really have to resist that temptation to turn that rudder until you have at least a little bit of way. The next thing to point out is when you do get a little bit away and you start to turn that rudder, there will be a significant force on it, which you won't be used to feeling. Going forward, the rudder's tendency is to want to go back to the middle of neutral, much like a car, because the water's going both sides of it. In reverse, the rudder will want to slam against the side that you've got it turned towards. Now, it won't slam against the side because you've got gearing and pulleys and all the rest of it in the way, but it will put a lot of force on your hands. And if you're not prepared for that, the wheel could spin. More significantly is it might make you as a new skipper doing this nervous because you say, oh my God, what's wrong? This wheel feels terrible. I've never felt it like this. Well, it's perfectly normal. You've got just water pushing against the rudder. So I think that I've said here, the rudder will have a lot of force on it, so hold on. And this is all good stuff you can learn when you're practicing, which we'll get to in a second. So you're now in reverse with the rudder in the middle, set to neutral, if you will. The boat will slowly start to reverse, but it will also swing to starboard, which is what most people refer to as prop walk. Typically about 30 degrees until the rudder has some control. That 30 degrees has a big variance on it. It depends the type of boat, type of propeller, all kinds of other things. So I'm throwing that in as a guideline. You'll need to determine your own prop walk on your own boat. That's about what to expect. And again, it's a fairly significant amount. So when you're starting your reverse, if you're not expecting that 30 degrees, if you set yourself up, let's say, to go in a straight line, because of space or that's your expectation, and suddenly the stern of the boat is moving 30 degrees away from where you thought, it can be pretty scary first time it happens. You say, oh my God, what on earth is the boat doing? I'm out of control. So as long as you're expecting it, then it's not a problem. And we will use that 30 degrees to effect in a bit. So it's just a diagrammatic form of what's happening. So when reverse is engaged, some people say the stern pulls to port, which is moving this way, the green arrow. Others say that the bow swings to starboard. The boat is rotating clockwise in this example. And that in this case, we're referring the boat to swinging to starboard. But just make sure you're not confused. When I'm talking about swinging to starboard, that would be the bow appears to swing to starboard. The stern, however, will swing to port. Okay. So rotating a boat on its axis, this is a really excellent bit of a skill that I recommend everyone does. It's something I think really fundamental that you should try when you get your boat out on the water. And this is to rotate it as many degrees as you like, but often people will say 360 degrees. In most practical cases, it can be useful to rotate 90 degrees or 180 degrees because you want to either go back in the opposite direction or turn a corner. But it really helps you understand the effect of prop walk. So we're starting from the boat at stop. You're putting the rudder to full starboard. So you want the bow to go to the right. And you're going to do a short burst of engine forward. So as we discussed a little earlier, a couple of slides back, because the prop wash is going over the rudder, it will respond and the bow will swing around nicely, just what you want. And as long as you do a short burst, you will have little forward momentum. You then go into reverse. And just a brief suggestion there, when you go from forward to reverse on a boat, you don't want to slam it straight through. I recommend going into neutral first, waiting, pause just for a second or two, and then going into reverse. If you just slam it from one to the other, you're going to break something or screw something up. So there's a lot of forwarding and reversing in this, and you want to be very gentle on your gearbox and your pulleys and everything else. You don't want to end up breaking or you won't get anything done. So we're going to go into reverse. The stern will rotate and pull to port, as that green arrow shows, and the bow will tend to turn to starboard, and you'll start to move a little bit, but not much. Now we're going to go and put the rudder full starboard again. So notice we've gone from the rudder being in neutral there to full starboard, and we're going to do another burst engine forward, and you're going to turn around even more. And you can see that third boat diagram is, another 10, 20 degrees further around clockwise than the first one. Let's try that now in the opposite direction. So against prop walk. And I've got a hint here, this doesn't work well and causes a lot of frustration if you try and force the boat to do this. So rudder full port, and the boat will turn quite nicely because again, you've got rudder controlling forward. You then go into reverse, and the prop walk is going to take you with the stern to port and the bow to forward. So it will undo the turn you just started to do when you went forward. And you're back where you started, basically. Now, one must say, a skillful skipper, of course, can override this, and with enough judicious care, you could get yourself around the wrong way. but it's awfully hard to do. And I'm going to show you some examples in a bit where I try to do that at Parrot Cove Marine, and I got myself into a hell of a mess. And I realized it's just not worth trying to do. There's better solutions to trying to turn a corner the wrong direction. So next is the effect of wind and current on a sailboat. Sailboat has a significant area underwater from the keel and rudder, which are both behind the center of rotation. Very important point to observe. The center of rotation, center of flotation are generally close to the middle of the boat, somewhere just behind the mast, more or less. But the key point here is from the water's point of view, most of the underwater resistance is the stern of the boat. And what that means is that the boat will always fall away from the wind because there's nothing up front to stop the wind from blowing the bow off, but there's all that stuff underwater to stop the wind from blowing the stern off. The current will always dominate the behavior of the boat, of course. It's, you know, hundreds of times stronger with water, and you need to really keep that in mind. Hopefully, in most of your docking situations, the current will be minimal. If it isn't, it really makes it tricky. If you did have a strong current and strong wind, then you'll need to take the vector of those on your boat and try and judge, okay, the current's going to do this, the wind's going to do that. I'll have to plan accordingly. One of my very first cruises with a paid skipper, because I wasn't confident enough myself, was in Croatia. And this paid skipper took us into a dock, which was on the seas, but it was off. The dock was actually based on a river, the mouth of a river, a narrow river, a narrow dock, I hasten to add, and it must have been running at about 4 or 5 knots. And there was just one boat width for him to get this sailing boat in. And to my amazement, he just got it in without a scratch because he could judge those two. He went upstream and allowed the current to carry him around and turned us in and did a beautiful job. But even I realized at the time that was phenomenal skill to do that. So I made a note there that I skipped over. So because the bow will always fall away from the wind, the boat is most stable when the stern is to the wind. It's counterintuitive for most people, but if the stern is to the wind, the boat will be stable because the bow will want to stay it's like an arrow. The bow is like the feathers, if you will. There's the drag from the wind keeps the bow away from the wind and the stern to the wind. If you put the bow into the wind, it will blow off one way or the other. So get familiar with your boat. Stop the boat facing directly into the wind and observe how the boat blows off to either side. So something you can do is put it into the wind and then just wait when you think you got it directly into the wind, and because of waves or a little bit of error or whatever, the bow will start to fall off one way, and you'll see it fall off, you know, either way, starboard or port. Then try using as little engine as rudder as possible to bring it back to the middle. So you're going to see which way it's falling off. You're going to counteract that with the rudder, give a little bit of engine, bring it back to the middle, go back to neutral, and wait till it flows off again. Then you may blow off the other way, bring it back the other way. And this skill is very useful when you're waiting in a fairway to get to the fuel dock, because so often when you're trying to go to a fuel dock in a tight dock, you'll find that there's a line of boats. You can't moor up anywhere, of course, and so that you've got to wait and just sit in the middle of this fairway. Often there's very little space with the wind blowing you, the current blowing you, and just trying to keep pointing in the right direction. So a very useful thing to try out in the sea in the clear, and a very useful tip. So from a standstill, put your boat into reverse and notice the direction and change of the angle of the boat due to prop walk. So this is how you'd note your own prop walk. At this point, if you're just noting the prop walk, to be blunt, it doesn't matter where you've got your rudder, because I'm just suggesting here, you just simply see the behavior when you start the boat in reverse. The rudder at that time won't be having any effect. I do then suggest that you then start to drive the boat in reverse. So put the rudder into the middle and try driving a figure of 8, for example, and feel how the rudder must be held against the water pressure. You'll get very much more comfortable with how the boat feels when you're driving in reverse. It's a little strange. I personally like to stand behind my wheel, because then it's normal. You're just steering it as you might normally. I mean, behind the wheel, but you're steering it normally. Some people like to put their back to the wheel and put their hands behind them and steer that way. It's your preference. but you just have to obviously know which way you're turning the wheel and be comfortable with that. When you do go in reverse, if you have a boat like mine, which has a nice swim platform, which is not considered highly seaworthy, you just need to be careful you don't get too much water in the back of the boat by getting carried away. The next thing you can practice is the turns around a point. So we talked a little earlier about trying to do those turns, going forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards. Try doing some of those. It's really essential skill to have in tight maneuvers, tight quarters. Some ideas for practicing docking safely. One suggestion is to find a mooring ball or something soft to go up against. You can throw, I'm not going to suggest you throw out a life jacket or something and go up against that, but you get the idea. You want something you can go up against that isn't going to get hard if you bump into it, but you also don't want to pull it into your propeller. So I generally try and find myself a mooring ball that there's no one on, obviously, and go up to that. So I'll go up to it in forward, and what you're going to do here is go into neutral some way distance from it and coast to a halt just as you reach the ball. The first few times you'll probably overshoot and you'll probably end up either hitting the ball or having to turn away from it because you'll have too much power. It's a surprise how much momentum a boat has. So the purpose of this exercise is to get a real feel as to how much momentum your boat has and when you can go into neutral to bring the boat to a stop. And that's something we'll talk about in a second when we get to an actual docking example. Now then you can do the same thing going up to the board in reverse and go into neutral and coast to a halt just as you reach the ball. So this would be simulating going into your slip or your dock in reverse, which is what this is mostly about here, and coming to a stop comfortably at the dock. What you don't want to have to do is to put it massively in forward and sort of scream the engine at 3,000 RPM just to stop yourself running into reverse at the dock. It takes a little bit of time to get used to that momentum, but it'll come in time. And my other note there is just note what speed you're doing this at. You might want to do it at a couple of different speeds to see how your momentum varies. Then the final suggestion is stop the boat a few boat lengths away from, but perpendicular to the mooring ball. So you're pretending that the mooring ball is going to be the end of your slip you're going to reverse into, and you're going to pretend that you're down the fairway perpendicular to that slip, and you're going to reverse down that fairway, turn towards the mooring ball and come up to the mooring ball and stop. So you'd be practicing docking, but completely in the clear. A few diagrams. So docking with prop walk, you're using short bursts in reverse. So here's one of the simplest docking scenarios where you're coming up simply to a dock. You've got plenty of space here. There's no boats in front of you, behind you. You've got lots of space. The left-hand one, you're coming up to the dock nicely with your bow close to the dock. Hopefully you get a foreline on. If you put the boat into reverse just briefly, that prop walk will nicely tuck your stern against the dock. And you look like a real pro. You throw the stern line on, the bow line's already on, you're done. If you come in on the starboard side of your boat, then you just have to be a little more cautious because when you go into reverse, the prop walk will walk you away from the dock. Not a problem if you're close enough and if you're prepared for it. You just have to throw the stern line a little further. But again, it's one of those things that if you're prepared for it, you know it's going to happen. It makes it so much easier. One thing to note here is if you know the direction of the wind, keep that in mind when you are docking. As I say, we're not going to go into it on this workshop. We won't be discussing the details, the impacts of winds and how to use spring lines. But in this example here, you can see very clearly, if the wind is coming from one direction, let's say from left to right, so it'd be coming from the west, if north is north, up, then the boat on the right, even though the prop walk is going to take the stern away, the boat on the right will nicely drift into the dock. So a good skipper will say, okay, the wind's going onto the dock. Don't have a problem here. I'll just wait till it takes me in. And using the wind to your advantage can be tremendously useful. If you've got the patience just to say, okay, the wind's going to do this. I don't need to rush. You just nicely drift in there and look like a real pro. If you're in the boat on the left, you just got to be a bit more judicious and the crew has to get the lines on the dock a little more quickly. Docking port to starboard. Here's one of the key factors that is worth really thinking about and understanding when you're going into a dock, especially if it's one you don't know. If I'm going into a dock that takes advantage of my walk to port, which is item 1, I can use that just fine. And I can go into the dock and use the prop walk to my advantage. If I'm going into dock example 2, where the dock is on my starboard side, prop walk is going to take me away from the dock. And as we discussed before, trying to do that 90-degree turn, it can be done, but it's a real pain. So here's the shocker. We mentioned a little earlier that boats are very stable in reverse. So I had this scenario just yesterday. I was taking my boat to NEB to have the fridge freezers fixed, and they told me I would be going into a dock on the right-hand side, and I have a prop walk, standard prop walk to port in reverse. So what I actually did was pull the boat up outside this fairway and went into reverse there. I had a lot of space there. So I came into this, I haven't drawn it here, but you'll see one similar to this in a minute. I came in, approached the boat. Number 2 was in the other way around. So I was in reverse already. And then I don't even have to use prop walk, because if you're in reverse, the boat really does steer very, very well. You can just maneuver it wherever you like. So I simply turned it in reverse all the way around and put it into this slip with no problems at all. I did ask the guy who helped us on the dock whether many people had that problem, whether they would reverse in. And at the risk of sounding a little arrogant, I'll say to you, his answer was, not many people reverse in on this side, but those do, we know that they know what they're doing, and they always make a good job of it. So I thought that was a nice thing to say. So here's some more details about going into a slip. Again, this is one that's going to be where the prop walk helps. You'd have to do the reverse if you're coming in the other way, but this example is, number 1, come to a stop about a boat length past the slip. It's as far as you feel you need to be comfortable so that you can get the boat in reverse under control before you turn it. I used to start more than a boat length, probably 2 boat lengths, because I'd want to make sure I really had the boat under control, going in reverse nicely down the fairway, and then I'd turn it at my convenience. In number 2, I'd start reversing and allow for prop walk. So this is when I'm getting a little better at reversing. I stop the boat in a place where when I go into reverse, the prop walk actually turns me towards my slip. And then number 3, just continue reversing in. Generally, I find I go into neutral when my stern is about level with the outside of the slip. So when the stern gets to about where that number 3 is, I'm in neutral, and there's enough momentum to take me all the way into the slip, and then just a little bit of forward to stop me before I hit the end. And if I haven't got enough momentum, I just give the throttle a little bit of a goose. The arrow down here under number 1 is intended to show that, especially initially when you're getting used to things, if possible, if the wind's not blowing you onto this dock, I like to be as far as I can away from my slip on the other side of the fairway, just to give myself a little more space. However, you do have to be obviously conscious to the boats you've got both sides of you, anything sticking out, and where the wind is. You don't want to be blown into the wind, but just be conscious of that. You don't want to put your, if number 1 was way up close against here, it's really tough to get around this corner where the 3 is. So you want to give yourself some space to get the boat around that corner. So here's a real live example, this Pirate Cove Marina that I mentioned to you, and where I had to go to extremes. So I'm going to sort of wind, and it really, in this case, didn't matter too much where the wind was coming from. In this case, the west, north is up here, and blowing me on to my dock, which was nice. Into Pirate Cove Marina, for those of you that know it. Up here at the top right is a bridge and a seawall. You can't go any further. You have to take a left, and there's this big brown seawall here. The brown represents rocks, and a small gap that you come in. You then have to do a 180 turn and come down past the fairway for shallow water and smaller boats into the main fairway and then into your dock. Now, the problem is if I came in the normal way forward, if I come down here to the bottom left, I can't go in forward here due to the wind, even though it's walking to port. I did this once and was pinned against the boats that were next to me here, where I'm indicating the cursor, because it was so narrow. There wasn't enough room for me to turn the boat. As soon as I stopped the boat, it was blown by the wind because I had no forward momentum to control myself, and it actually literally pinned me against these boats, and I had to get people to help push me off. So that was very embarrassing. I couldn't go into reverse in this corner down here and come in forward and go into reverse, because it would have meant reversing counter to prop walk. You notice the prop walk would have been the wrong way. And I did try that once, and I ended up in a hell of a mess there as well. There's rocks. This diagram doesn't show that, but there's rocks all the way over here, and I nearly hit some of the rocks. So I decided to bite the bullet, so to speak. I went into reverse outside in the Seconic and reversed all the way in. Looked like a complete idiot, did all these turns all the way in, got into the dock with no problem. And I had people each side of me who just got to know me because they're still new to the boat, and they were pretending to hold up signs, as like in the Olympics, of 7, 8, 8.5 or whatever. But I managed to get it in without actually hitting anything, which was quite a surprise. So here's some step-by-steps. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly because it's what we've already discussed. I'll be circulating the slides. You're welcome to look at them, but just a little bit of a refresher. So determine the wind and the current at the dock. Even if it's a dock you're not familiar with, call on the radio, find out where the wind and the current is. Don't go by what you have outside the dock, because typically they're very different. Docks are sheltered, the current often is much less, and the winds can be very different. Hopefully less, but sometimes very different. In my former dock over at Cowaset, because there was a very high cliff and railway lines and buildings, when we got into the dock, the wind was totally different from what it is further out. Have a plan. Make a docking plan that accommodates the wind, current, prop walk, and environment for your boat. Think through where you're going into, what side you're going into, where you need your fenders, what the effects are going to be. If you intend to dock in reverse, determine when to go into reverse. And the previous slide was intended to highlight that. You may need to go into reverse earlier than you think in order to have control. Don't assume you can only go into reverse when you're in front of your slip. There's nothing wrong with going into reverse way outside and just reversing all the way in. It may look dumb to other people who don't know what you're doing, but it really does work. Enter the fairway and position on the far side of the fairway from the dock, allowing for the fact, as we said earlier, you're not going to hit other boats and so on. Stop one boat length past the dock. And that's assuming that you're now getting fairly good. The one boat length means that when you start into reverse, the prop walk will take you more or less straight into the dock. If you don't have that confidence, go a little further. Stop 2 boat lengths or 3 boat lengths until you feel you've got the boat under control. Center the rudder, go into reverse with medium RPM, about 1500, 200, 2000, just enough speed to have rudder control. So what you're looking for there with the rudder centered is the boat will go into reverse, you'll see the prop walk, and fairly quickly build up some speed, and you'll start to feel the rudder responding. It takes about 10, 15, 20 seconds, and they're the longest 10, 15, 20 seconds you'll ever have on a boat. Hold onto the rudder firmly. Observe the prop walk is taking the boat into the dock. If it's not, stop and try again. Pull yourself out. Don't try and force it. In reverse, you've got little control here, so you don't want to be a hero. Just give up, abort, come out, try it again, figure out what you did wrong, and take another shot at it. Once the boat has built speed, use the rudder to complete the turn. Put the boat into neutral as soon as there's sufficient speed to coast to the dock. You don't want to be driving into the dock at 3 knots and then having to scream into forward. And then use minimal additional bursts of power to move or slowly as required. No-go docking. Always be ready to either modify your plan or abort altogether. Now, the conditions may not be what you expect. Other traffic gets in your way. That can happen and really screw you up. So you have to be in a position where you can suddenly move out because someone's being rude and not giving way to you. Or just simply the plan's not going well. You didn't allow for a factor you're not doing, you just screwed up, whatever. So reversing into a dock. I'd now like to quickly switch over to a very short video, which I've got to find. Here we go. Am I sharing this, Craig?
Yes, you are.
Am I sharing, Craig?
Yes.
I can't
you
hear
hear
you,
me?
Craig.
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. So I'm going to play this twice. I'll do it once, just all the way through. It's only about a minute long, and then I'll stop it and we can discuss the steps we just discussed. This is Pirate Cove Marina. Those are the rocks at the far end I mentioned, and you can see the outside there. And I'm just coming in parallel to the dock. The dock is on the right-hand side. So the boat's just starting to turn because of prop walk. It's purely prop walk. It's gaining a little bit of speed now in reverse. You can see I've got rudder control because the boat turns slightly there. Turning around now under rudder control, prop walk is over. About now, you're going to revert into neutral, not reverse, or into neutral. Now just starting to judge where you need to go into forward to stop yourself hitting the dock. And hopefully you get forward lines and stern lines attached. You can just see the guy on the bow. And there we go. I'd like to go through it one more time and just stop it a few steps. So I'm going to stop it here and point out that you can just see the prop wash coming from the back of the boat here as it goes into reverse. So if you look here, you'll see the prop wash bringing up and you'll notice the prop walk that's going on. That's turning simply because of prop walk. And if you look at the angle it's going at, I actually turn it away a little softer angle just there because I'm now getting rudder control. And now I've got enough control to be able to turn the boat under control into there. And that's all now under full rudder control. And you'll notice that coming out of this slip or into it, really haven't, it's not much more. It's about 5, maybe 8 feet more than the boat. So coming in and out of here was a real nightmare. So that's it. I'm going to take everyone off mute and let's have any questions.
Yeah, I'm going to start pointing out some of the key points that I saw here. The biggest trick that I think Alex pointed out is those turns around a point. That's the first thing it can do. I remember when I first got my boat, I was up in Manchester by the sea, went way down the end and found that there was a little bit windy and I could not turn around by making a 360, or I'm sorry, 180. And so I had to learn quickly how to do you just muted everybody, Alex. And
yeah,
so
sorry, I'm trying.
That's all right. So knowing the theory, I put it in forward, put it in reverse, put it in forward, just as Alex pointed out there. And boy, it's amazing how you can, in a one and a half, 2 boat lengths, you can do a 180 and do practically no moving other than a little bit of drifting because of the wind, but it really works. Alex also pointed out backing up to a mooring, I think, is a wonderful thing to do. And the third thing a real takeaway thing is doing figure eights, because you'll find that once the boat is moving, you can turn either way. But when you're starting the boat, at the first couple of times you do it, it seems to have a mind of its own. And you really have to learn how much it's going to turn before you get any steerage. That video showed Alex definitely did a 15-degree turn, twisting to starboard or the stern to port. And then he kind of straightened it out and he went and kind of did a little bit of an S turn there to keep over on the far side. So those are my observations. Now I think we can ask for some questions. And Alex, maybe you want to kill the video so we can see the people.
Oh, sure.
Who has some questions while he's doing that? Or comments? There you go. Somebody's got to have a question.
I think we've stunned them into silence, Craig. Take yourself off mute if you have a question.
Betsy, go ahead. Unmute yourself. Yeah, I'll see if I can. Okay. No, you have to on the there you
There
go.
we go. There we go. Yeah, thanks. So in the picture, I think I can describe it without you having to put it up, but with you going into Parrot Cove, you described going in reverse and going up and over the wall before you then would turn into your alley. I don't understand why, if I put myself in reverse and went around the wall the other way, you said it was a real problem, and you even kind of got pushed into the rocks, especially because you said don't point the bow into the wind, and by going around the top, I'm pointing my bow into the wind, albeit I'm under control I'm going forward in reverse. Didn't explain that well, but why going up over the top of the wall? I don't understand that versus going from below. Why is it better to go over the top?
Let me just share that and see if I can understand what you're asking. I missed on that, Betsy. So bear with me a second while I figure out how to share this again. Share screen. There we are.
I think what you're going to find, Betsy, is he's going to show that the dynamics of that it doesn't work. What theoretically should work is great, but sometimes you don't have the depth or the room to go around the other end.
Is this what you're referring to, Betsy?
Exactly, and that X in the middle is the one that I actually would have. Yes, I would have thought I could do that.
Well, because that's the whole point, Betsy. It was why I mentioned here. Prop walk wants to take me to the port, the stern to port. So the prop walk's going to take me over here. It doesn't go to the left. So when I go into reverse, I'm suddenly finding that I'm being pushed onto these rocks over here where the cursor is.
Oh, we're assuming that you're assuming that we're going from a stop at that point, as opposed to coming around the wall and being in control.
Well, if I want to go into reverse, I have to stop.
Okay.
Right.
I understand your point now.
Yeah, this would be coming in forward. So not like I've shown here, all the way, as you say, coming in forward over the top in control and coming here to a full stop with the intention of reversing around this corner, correct?
I missed that part. I thought I was coming from the bottom in reverse.
No, there's actually more rocks here. There's another slip down here, so I didn't draw that in. But yeah, sorry for the confusion there, Betsy.
Now I understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I'll leave the screens up in case other people have questions about other slides.
I think that she actually just pointed out a good edit if you were to just continue that bottom dock all the way across. And I know it's not quite accurate, but it would show that you can't come in from the other direction.
Right. Yeah.
You're limited in how far you can go there. And he's got a very good point there.
Yeah, exactly.
The prop walk there, you really have to be going, as you saw, I'm going to call it a boat length. It's probably more like a half boat length, but you can't do it. Ian says you can't unmute. Have you tried down the bottom left-hand corner?
Yeah, Matt's saying the same thing.
Maybe you can, Alex, maybe you can unmute everybody and then let them mute themselves and unmute themselves.
Yeah, I'll see if I can. So I've got an ask to unmute. I'm clicking on ask to unmute, guys. You should be able to see that.
Yep.
Hello.
Hey, thanks, Alex.
There's a mute all, but I don't see an unmute all.
Don't
Sorry about
touch
that.
anything, Alex. It's working now, okay?
So what,
Okay,
did you have a question, Ian, or did you have a comment?
I was going to make a couple of comments, Alex. Just a few things that are kind of obvious to some of us, but maybe not to others. When you're in reverse, never ever let go of that wheel, okay? You always have to maintain control. You see people let go of the wheel, and next thing you know, your rudder's at full lock, if not broken. So it's worth pointing that out. There was one other thing which I forgot in amongst all the unmuting business. I was very fortunate on Mystic that she just didn't have prop walk. Some boats don't. Some boats have terrible prop walk. Make sure you check it out before you rely on it. Okay. I'll think of the third thing that I had. So if anybody else wants to jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you, Alex. There's one thing that I like to do is whenever I'm in a new boat, I like to test it. I go in reverse and then I slow down and I slow down until I have no more control. I want to see how slow I can get the boat until I really lose reverse control on it. Just so if I do have to back into something, I kind of have an idea of how it's going to behave.
And of course, Matt, don't you find that that varies a lot with the wind and or current? Because with no current, you can be doing, you know, a quarter or half a knot. Whereas if you get some wind, you have to keep enough way on to do that. So Ian also pointed out something, different boats. My previous boat had the prop about 10 or 15 degrees off center to port. And wow, it made it beautiful because I had practically zero prop walk, because when you had was starting up in reverse, the prop walk was offset by the propeller being off there. If you have a full keel, you have similar prop walk, but you really have to be moving a little bit faster before you can get any way on. And the turning radius, something that was just pointed out, that the turning radius on a full keel boat is way longer than if you got a fin keel boat. What other questions or comments we have?
Oh, sorry, I did think of the other thing. When you're going into reverse, always make sure your rudder's centered. I think Alex mentioned it, but I just think it's worth really emphasizing it. You must have your rudder centered until the boat starts to move and the rudder bites. If you turn the rudder before that, it stalls out and you'll never gain control. So it won't be 10 or 15 seconds, it'll be minutes and you'll crash. So be patient and swallow the butterflies and wait for the rudder to bite before you turn it when you're going into reverse.
And following up on that, Ian, and something that Betsy pointed out, you try to have, once you get motion going, you want enough speed so the boat is moving and you have good control in reverse. But you either want to put it in neutral, but if you go on any distance, you can't do it. And so you get the speed up a little bit and then put it down to pretty much dead idle. So you just have enough power to maintain the speed, but not so much that you have any prop walk. Makes a huge difference. And another point I'm going to put in, sailboats go into a dock a lot easier if you go in forward. So for those of us who are uncomfortable going into a dock, going in forward is a lot easier.
You didn't have to deal with prop walk coming out, but it's not such a big problem usually.
You do have to have prop walk going out, but there's a couple of things you can do to take advantage, going out. Number one, if you're going against a prop walk, what you can do is you can either spring out or push your stern in the direction. So you get a little bit, the boat's kind of pointing in the right direction. Then when you start to back out, give it a good kick of thrust to get moving. Then you immediately lower the throttle down to idle or as low as you can with the wind conditions, so that you're now having the rudder do the work and the propeller is not doing the prop walk.
Is there anyone who can't unmute themselves who's trying to? We can help you.
What other thoughts do we have out here? Somebody's got to have some questions.
Yeah.
We don't mind dumb questions. I can't be the only one asking dumb questions.
I was just going to throw in another one, which has nothing to do with what Alex has said, except that when you are docking, if at all possible, never trust anybody standing on the dock. Okay. Brief your crew ahead of time and get your crew trained up to the point where you can trust them to handle the lines, and don't throw your lines to the people on the dock, because they'll always screw it up and you'll end up looking like a fool.
Right. Good
Agree
point.
with that. Agree
And
with that
the
statement.
corollary of that is if you're going to the same marina all the time, you totally ignore or be a little bit mean to the people that you don't trust. But if there is somebody that you know that, oh, there's Ian, he knows what he's doing, he'll put the right line in the right place. Good, Ian, take this bow line, take this stern line. And you know, it sure is nice to having somebody that knows what they're doing on the dock. I've seen, especially on the tall ships when I'm doing it, they'll actually send one of their crew ashore in a dinghy to handle their lines.
Yeah.
So that they have somebody onshore that can either catch or throw lines. Typically they catch it, but my boat, I have dedicated lines so that they all fit on certain cleats. So that as long as you know which cleat it goes on, it's very obvious which way they go.
Before I forget, I should mention to everyone that this is the first of what could be several workshops. Both Craig and I have volunteered to take anyone on our boats to let them practice docking, not actually in a dock, but out, you know, made at a board or something. Or if any skippers or boat owners want us to go on board with them, we'd be glad to do that as well, you know, if they want a practical session.
I'm
Anything else we need to cover? Otherwise, we can stop.
Yeah, I'm
Craig.
encouraging anybody else that has any comments or questions. Crew, you've been on the boats when you've been a little bit nervous. Tell us what your thoughts are.
I'm just always, this is Dan, I'm just waiting for commands. I don't want to go to the wrong place on the boat and not be prepared to either jump for the dock or be prepared to throw a line.
Communications, wonderful comment there. You know, there's a nice balance between you know, jumping the gun. When I say I want you on the starboard bow and all of a sudden you're on the port quarter, well, you're not where I wanted you to. But on the other hand, when you see that the you really need to catch that line that's in midship, maybe you want to start moving in that direction. So when I say, oh, Dan, can you grab that line at midship? You're halfway there or all the way there. And there's also a fine line. You know, you can ask questions, but you don't want to disrupt the captain, the skipper, because if he's all of a sudden talking to you rather than paying attention to the boat, that can be discouraging. But where's the happy medium? Do you want me to grab this line? Yes, grab that line. You know, yesterday I had a situation where I had first time in the dock for the season, I had lines both on the dock and on the boat, and my crew up on the bow didn't do anything to either one of them because he wasn't sure which one to do. So that was communications on my part.
I think Eric Goldman's trying to raise his hand.
Say again, Betsy.
I think Eric Goldman wants to be unmuted.
Bottom left is the unmute button, Eric.
Not working.
I have to mute myself while the ship spells go off.
I've selected allow participants to unmute themselves.
There he
You should be
is.
able
Okay, I'm
There
here
you
now.
go.
Yeah, thanks for the seminar. I didn't have any comments related to it, but I'm a new applicant and this is my first event, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce myself. I'm looking for.
welcome, Eric. Great. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Welcome, Eric. I mentioned before this meeting started, I'll mention it to everybody that's here. I have nobody signed up to sail this coming Monday, probably going out of Winthrop about 10:30. So if any of you are interested in joining me, you're definitely welcome to. And I'll probably send out an email, or you can send me a text on here, or a message on here. And also we can do evaluations on Monday.
So I just have one comment. That was great, Alex. Your skill, especially backing in, is really impressive. But so if you're coming into a dock that you know, is not your normal dock, let's say you're cruising, and isn't the first line that really you want to get under control is like a spring line in the center rather than a bow or a stern line?
That's
General.
often the case, but you
Yeah.
also want to make sure that the spring line, you know, that's very much dependent on what the wind and current are doing. Sometimes a spring line can all of a sudden make the bow go bing out. So,
I just mean if you're like the only crew on a boat and you're coming in and the captain's at the wheel, you
yeah.
know, and there's
It's not a
nobody
bad
else.
idea, because the nice thing about that is you have a chance to have the spring line stop you from bashing into the end dock if you set it the right length. That's always the scary part, is to make sure it's set at the right length, because you make it 3 or 4 feet too long and you'll crash before you go stop. So certainly good to think about that, Sue Ellen. You know,
Well,
trying
I
to figure.
mean, otherwise, which line would you put on first if you were gonna, you know, have an order of whether?
I would go by the wind, Sue Ellen, on what the wind's likely
Wind
to
and
do.
current.
So if my
Okay,
bow is going to blow off, I'd ask them to get the bow line on
Yeah.
get that.
first. And similarly, if the stern's going to blow off, I'd have the stern done.
Okay,
If you have plenty of length, I think a spring line would be a great idea, because it does it. Plus, you can also just pull the whole boat in with a spring line. A spring line doesn't have to, you know, if you got
well,
a
that's what I
midship.
mean, like a center line to just like.
Right. The
Get the
nice
boat.
thing about a center line is you can kind of, if you got fenders going along, you can just kind of, you know, pull the whole boat in, and, you know, wrap it around so you're not going further away from the dock. So it doesn't have to be, you know, really a spring line. It could be just a midship line going straight
That's what I
up.
meant, a midship line rather
Yeah.
than a power stern.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
Something
that's,
I'll do on occasion, Sue Ellen, is called a ferryman's line. And I'll take a spring line, but to the reverse, the stern spring line, not the bow spring line that Craig mentioned. So that if I can get that on, I can put the boat gently in forward and turn it slightly to away from the dock. It'll just pin the boat against the dock. But you have to have the right conditions and know the length of the line, as Craig said earlier, and all those sort of things. But if that can be done, then it works very nicely, because it pins you against the dock. And if you're single-handed, you can actually step off the boat and go get the other lines on.
great.
Yeah,
And
I'll just
Eric-
back up Sue Ellen. I would say, Sue Ellen, it's pretty much right. In my experience, if you've got a midship line, get it on first. I would say 95% of the time.
yeah.
Okay.
Good
You
point.
can do everything you need with one line.
Mhm.
Eric, you have your hand raised again?
Yeah, I was just going to say on the communication piece, in my experience, it's just really useful for the captain and crew to have that conversation about what order we're going to put lines on the dock before we approach the dock.
Yeah.
But I always like to brief the crew, Eric, before we leave the dock with how we're going to depart the dock, and then what typically our docking practice will be when we come back. So they've got some idea, and especially discuss the variables. You know, we may have to do this, we may have to do that.
Yeah, even though you've done it before, seeing what everybody's responsibility is really helpful for the crew. And it's, you know, helpful for the skipper as well, because you're thinking it out loud.
I had one skipper tell me as part of the crew and the rest of the crew, you don't need a fender, just use your body, right? To block away from, you know, about to hit another boat or something like that. No, let's leave the fender there. Just use your body. So I just wanted
Nice
to
idea.
throw that out there for you to comment on.
Yeah, save those fenders. You got 2 feet.
Bail to somebody else.
Yeah, that was one command I'd be very hesitant to follow myself.
Okay, I'm
So
going
I've
to
got,
stop the recording now. If
I-
there's
I've-
other questions to come up, that's
Yeah,
great. You
this-
can carry on.
okay, this is Dan.
Hey,
Uh,
Dan.
Coming from the aviation community, I can see that there should be something out there called a simulator that you could practice this with on. So, like on, at least graphically see what you're doing before you get out there on an expensive boat.
Yeah, it's called Craig's boat.
The sacrificial boat, right? And I was just wondering, I can see all this. The turn's about a point. It's something we do in airplanes, in fact, and we do a lot of practice. But of course, there's no rocks out there that we have to worry about. And I guess with the current, it's added so much complexity to my maneuvering ideas that's just, it's incredible. I guess it's going to take a lot of practice, and I imagine a lot of handholding to make sure we don't hurt something.
Well, and occurrence can be a real concern because they change. I know I was at a strange dock a few years ago, and I went out. It was only 5 minutes out to the boat, another 3 or 4 minutes in. And in that time, the current had changed, and it went from half a knot in one direction to a half a knot in the opposite direction in that amount of time. And boy, a half a knot when you're going in the wrong direction is a lot of speed.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now, but we can certainly carry on chatting and have more questions.